For nearly 5 millennia, we've been told a story, echoed unwaveringly in the halls of traditional archaeology, that a single man, Pharaoh Khufu, known to the Greeks as Cheops, commissioned the most imposing monument ever built by human hands. A tomb, an offering to eternity. The Great Pyramid. The official narrative claims it was built in just 20 years. 20. With thousands of workers, rudimentary copper tools, ropes, and sheer brute force. No advanced machinery, no forgotten technology, just sweat, relentless sun, and obedience to the God King. But if we look closely, something doesn't add up, literally. The stones, some weighing several tons, fit together with a precision that would make the best modern engineers flinch. The copper marks, which should be everywhere, are few. Very few. And what is abundant is a question that textbooks rarely dare to ask. Is this history as solid as the monument it attempts to explain? Here begins a journey that challenges everything we thought we knew. Because the truth is this: much of the accepted knowledge about the pyramids is based more on educated guesswork than hard evidence. And worse, there are indications that certain chapters have been carefully edited out of the story, hidden, buried on purpose. And right at the center of this enigma stands a controversial figure, Dr. Zahi Hawass, Egypt's former Minister of Antiquities and, for decades, the most powerful man in the world of Egyptology. Nothing moves in the sands of the Nile without his authorization. No stone is excavated without his signature. Every sealed chamber, every forgotten inscription, every ancient secret passes through him first. That door was closed, and I closed it for a reason. So why open it again? Because it's closed. I closed it. But, sir, I'll close it again. This theory is dead. This exchange, as tense as it is revealing, is no exception. It's the norm. Because while other archaeologists invite new ideas, Hawass blocks them. While some researchers seek to reinterpret the mysteries with fresh evidence, he seems determined to keep an ancient version intact, unchanging. Because we're not talking about crazy theories or baseless conspiracies. We're talking about real findings, physical evidence that directly contradicts the official narrative. Hidden cavities detected with modern scanners, sealed shafts leading to nowhere, or something else. Pieces that don't fit into the puzzle we were taught in school. On more than one occasion, investigations have been shut down at the crucial moment, just when it seemed we might discover something that would rewrite not only the history of Egypt, but the history of all humanity. Is Hawass protecting her country's cultural heritage, or is she protecting something much more uncomfortable? Something that challenges not only what we know, but how we know it. The pyramids have fascinated the world since Herodotus described them as wonders beyond comprehension. But what awaits us is not simple awe. We'll explore what is rarely shown, the cracks in history, the silenced questions, the answers that could have been right in front of us all along, but covered up by centuries of tradition and convenience. Let's take a key example: the interior of the Great Pyramid. There are not only known chambers, such as the king's or queen's. Recent cosmic ray studies revealed the existence of at least one enormous cavity, just above the Grand Gallery. A space no one had mentioned before. No hieroglyphics, no visible access, no official explanation. What's there? A ceremonial hall? A lost archive? Or something we're not yet ready to understand? Next, let's examine the blocks. Some weigh more than a modern truck. Transporting them from the quarries, aligning them with millimeter precision, and placing them tens of meters high with only wooden rollers and ropes is questionable, to say the least. What if it wasn't just brute force that built this marvel? What if behind its construction lay forgotten knowledge, technologies that still defy our understanding today? So, back to the central question. If this wasn't simply a tomb, if it wasn't just the whim of a king, then what was it? An astronomical marker? An archive of ancient knowledge? An artifact of unknown purpose? As new information emerges, many young archaeologists are demanding a reopening of the case. They want to dig deeper, to scan in greater detail, to question the old certainties. But time and again, they are met with the same thing. Closed doors, denied permits, and a power structure that prefers to preserve what is already known. And that is where we must ask ourselves the ultimate question. Are we preserving the past or preventing the present from rediscovering it? Prepare to look at the ancient stone giants with new eyes. We unearth truths that have been ignored, not for lack of evidence, but for lack of will. Because sometimes the greatest secrets aren't hidden deep in the earth. They're hidden deep in the story. And what you're about to discover could change everything. When we think of Egypt, our minds are filled with spectacular images. Golden masks, hieroglyphics carved precisely on ancient walls, and a monumental figure rising above the desert sands like a stone sentinel. The Great Pyramid of Giza. This colossus of perfectly fitted blocks, located on the Giza Plateau, has for centuries been a symbol of power, engineering, and mystery. According to conventional history, learned in museums, schools, and textbooks, this structure was erected approximately 4,500 years ago. We are told it was the work of Pharaoh Khufu, also known as Cheops, and that its purpose was to serve as a royal tomb, a monumental burial chamber built with rudimentary tools, human strength, and an unwavering faith in the afterlife. On the surface, it's a stunning narrative, a tribute to the ingenuity and perseverance of a civilization that still fascinates the world. But the more we examine the details, the more the certainties we've been taught as unquestionable begin to crumble. And this is where the story gets interesting. Because despite being one of the most spectacular architectural achievements in ancient history, the Great Pyramid is surrounded by a surprising void. There is no conclusive documentary evidence directly linking it to Khufu. This is particularly strange when we consider something fundamental about the Egyptians. They were obsessive about record-keeping. From offering lists to battles, royal births, and even the most everyday activities, everything was recorded, painted, carved, or written on papyrus. Temples are filled with chronicles, tombs meticulously describe rituals and genealogies. And yet, when it comes to the most imposing monument they ever built, the silence is deafening. Where are the ceremonial inscriptions? Where are the texts celebrating its completion? Where are the reliefs showing Khufu overseeing its construction? Nothing. Defenders of the traditional narrative point to markings found in one of the upper inner chambers, discovered centuries after the pyramid was first explored. Faint, barely visible, markings that seem to spell out the pharaoh's name. But even that has been questioned. The fact that they were found so late, in such an inaccessible area, has raised suspicions. Some experts have even suggested that they may have been added in recent times, accidentally or deliberately. And here's an uncomfortable truth we can't ignore. Just because a name appears painted or engraved on a structure doesn't guarantee that that individual was its builder. In fact, history is replete with cases where ancient monuments were reappropriated by later leaders to assert power, control narratives, or simply inscribe themselves in eternity. So, how solid are the historical foundations of this widely accepted theory? What if we've been mistaken for centuries in assuming the authorship of the world's most iconic pyramid? Some independent archaeologists have begun to point out the flaws in this official version. They question how it is possible that, in all the vast documentation of ancient Egypt, there is no detailed description of the construction process. There are no plans, no lists of workers, no commemorative ceremonies. Did the ancient Egyptians simply decide not to record one of their civilization's greatest achievements? Or are we looking in the wrong place? Another detail worth mentioning is the technology. We are told that copper tools, stone hammers, and mud chutes were used to move blocks weighing several tons with millimeter precision. However, field tests have failed to replicate this feat with absolute success. In modern experiments, even with heavy machinery, replicating the perfect alignment and tight assembly of the blocks has proven extremely difficult. And let's not forget something even more puzzling: the pyramid's astronomical orientation. It's aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal points, with such a minuscule margin of error that only recently have we been able to match it with modern technology. How did they achieve it? With what instruments? With what knowledge of geometry, astronomy, and physics? Is it plausible that this masterpiece was simply the result of trial and error? Or was there something more? Let's return then to the question that resonates most strongly. If Khufu wasn't the builder of the Great Pyramid, who was? And perhaps even more intriguing, for what purpose? The idea that this pyramid was merely a tomb begins to fade when we consider that no human remains were ever found inside. No sarcophagus with a body, no funerary treasure, no internal decoration, as is common in other royal tombs. Only enigmatic passageways, empty chambers, and a persistent feeling that its function was far more complex than we imagine. All of this compels us to reconsider history not from a place of unfounded skepticism, but from a legitimate right to question. Because when evidence is scarce, when the evidence is inconsistent, and official responses are based on assumptions, archaeology's true duty is not to protect a narrative, but to seek the truth. And in the case of the Great Pyramid, that truth still seems buried, not under the sand, but under layers of centuries of assumptions that few have dared to challenge. Will this be the generation that finally sees this wonder with fresh eyes? Will we be able to break free from the myth to discover the true origins of one of humanity's greatest enigmas? One thing is certain. The more we learn about the Great Pyramid, the more evident it becomes that its history is far from set in stone. There are times in history when the questions are so vast, so inconvenient, that they are simply ignored. The Great Pyramid of Giza is one such case, and at the heart of this mystery lies an inconsistency so baffling that it challenges everything we thought we knew about ancient Egypt, its purpose. For more than 2 centuries, classical Egyptology has steadfastly defended a narrative that this monumental pyramid was designed as a tomb for Pharaoh Khufu, the legendary ruler of the 4th dynasty. A majestic tomb built to ensure his passage to the afterlife, in keeping with the complex funerary beliefs of his culture. But when one delves inside the Great Pyramid, one doesn't find what one might expect from a royal tomb. There are no hieroglyphs celebrating the pharaoh. There are no scenes of his divine ascension, no religious reliefs, no ritual mentions. What there is silence, smooth stones, shadowy corridors, and an absence that screams louder than any inscription: the total lack of human remains. Not a mummy, not a single bone. Egyptian royal tombs, even the most looted, often leave behind at least some trace of their original purpose. A broken box, A partial inscription, gold fragments, statuettes, royal symbols, mummified remains. But at the heart of the Great Pyramid, there is none of that. Only empty chambers and structures that seem to have been designed for something very different. And this is where the big question arises. If it wasn't a tomb, what was it? The answer is not simple, but the clues are there, waiting to be interpreted. The architecture of the Great Pyramid is a marvel that continues to perplex modern engineers. Its orientation is astonishingly precise, aligned with true north to within a fraction of a degree. To put this in perspective, even with satellite technology and digital compasses, aligning a structure of this size with such accuracy remains a monumental challenge. Inside, the mystery deepens. Enormous blocks of granite, some estimated to weigh up to 80 tons, were transported from quarries located more than 800 kilometers to the south. But they weren't just moved. They were positioned with a precision that defies logic. Flat surfaces, exact right angles, millimeter-perfect alignments. As if each stone had been cut and placed using technology we can't easily master even today. Mechanical engineer Christopher Dunn spent decades studying these structures and came to a disturbing conclusion. Many of the cuts and perforations he observed are not only unusual, but appear to have been made with advanced tools, capable of machining with a regularity and perfection unmatched by stone hammers or copper chisels. We're talking about perfectly circular cuts, grooves of uniform depth, surfaces so smooth they appear polished by modern machinery. And these aren't isolated cases. They appear in multiple sections of the monument, in different blocks, with a consistency that suggests a standardized technique. To test these claims, researchers attempted to replicate these results using only the tools accepted by traditional archaeology. The experiment was clear. The copper chisels wore down almost instantly. The stones were barely scratched. After days of exhausting work, they managed to scrape off only a few millimeters. This leads us to an awkward dilemma. If our modern methods can't match the precision of these ancient cuts, what kind of knowledge or tools were employed more than 4 millennia ago? Are we underestimating the capabilities of a civilization that perhaps knew much more than we suppose? The answer to that question continues to divide the scientific community. On the one hand, there are those who argue that it was all a matter of time, manpower, and faith. That with enough determination and generations of work, anything is possible. But that explanation loses strength when we observe that other pyramids, built in similar or later eras, don't come close to achieving the same level of precision or durability. Why was only one pyramid, that of Giza, built with such mastery? And there's something else that doesn't fit: the pyramid's internal structure. The chambers don't seem to follow a traditional funerary logic. There's no space clearly decorated as a mortuary chamber. There are no offering rooms, and the design itself seems to respond to a different function. Tunnels that align with specific stars, axes that connect to key astronomical points, geometric proportions based on universal mathematical constants. None of this is typical of a tomb. None of this is seen in the burials of the Valley of the Kings, nor in the pyramids of Saqqara or Dashur. So let's return to the essential question. Why build such a monumental structure with such inexplicable precision, and then leave no inscription claiming its authorship? Some will say it was looted, that everything was stolen centuries ago. But if that were the case, why did the looters leave the most valuable blocks intact? Why are there no signs of damage in the deeper chambers? Why were no traces of mummification or religious artifacts found? The absence of all this isn't just a coincidence. It's a message, a void that pushes us to reconsider history, not from the comfort of what we think we know, but from the courage to ask uncomfortable questions. The Great Pyramid still stands, defiant, like an unanswered question written in stone. A structure that seems to have been built not only to withstand time, but also to provoke future generations, to force us to look beyond the official narrative, to ask ourselves not only how, but why, and who. Because sometimes what's missing from a story says much more than what's present. One of the most enigmatic and often overlooked aspects of the Great Pyramid of Giza has nothing to do with its size, its age, or even its purpose. It's a detail that lies in obscurity, literally. The pyramid's internal structure is made up of a complex network of corridors, chambers, and narrow passageways that wind through different levels, with varying inclines and enclosed spaces that make passage difficult. These passageways, some carved from solid stone, must have required extreme precision and, above all, constant lighting during their construction. Now, consider this. If we were to try to dig a similar tunnel today, we would need lamps, flashlights, and electric generators. But more than 4,500 years ago, modern technology didn't yet exist. How did Egyptian builders light their tunnels back then? Traditional theory suggests a rather rudimentary method: burning torches or oil lamps. At first glance, this seems logical. After all, that's what they had at their disposal. However, when we examine the interior of the Great Pyramid, a problem arises that no one has been able to fully explain. There are no traces of soot, no black stains, no smoke residue on the walls or ceilings. Not a single mark to indicate that flames were lit there. This is particularly strange because in other Egyptian tombs, much smaller and less ancient, the ceilings are marked with evidence of burning. But in the Great Pyramid, the most complex monument of all, everything is immaculate, as if the torches had never been used. So how did they do it? This is where the story starts to get more interesting and more uncomfortable for mainstream academics. The possibility that some form of unconventional lighting was used, perhaps a lost or forgotten technology, has been floated for decades. Did they use polished mirrors to reflect sunlight into the interior? Some have suggested it. But even that option is unlikely. The angular design of the tunnels makes it nearly impossible, and the angle of the sun would only allow for a minimal portion of the tunnel to be illuminated for a few hours a day. The truth is that this lack of a convincing explanation opens the door to a bold hypothesis. The pyramid builders could have had knowledge that we still don't understand, or that has been lost in time. And it is not the only indication that points in that direction. Over the past few decades, several researchers have begun to challenge the official paradigm of Egyptian archaeology. Among them, names such as Robert Bauval, John Anthony West, and Robert Schoch have proposed new interpretations, often based on precise observations, but which have been received with skepticism or outright hostility by the more orthodox academic community. Robert Bauval, for example, proposed a fascinating hypothesis known as the Orion correlation theory. According to his analysis, the three main pyramids on the Giza Plateau are not arranged randomly, but exactly replicate the position of the three stars of Orion's belt as they appeared in the sky around 10,500 BC. If this alignment was intentional, then the pyramids could be much older than official history admits. And that, of course, changes everything. Another key researcher is geologist Robert Schoch, who closely studied the erosion patterns on the Great Sphinx. Together with alternative Egyptologist John Anthony West, he reached a conclusion that shook the foundations of Egyptian chronology. The Sphinx shows clear signs of having been eroded by water, not by wind or sand, as had been previously assumed. The type of weathering it exhibits, smooth shapes, wavy curves, rounded grooves, can only be produced by intense and persistent rainfall. And here comes the crux of the matter. The last period of abundant rainfall in Egypt occurred more than 8,000 years ago. This would imply that the Sphinx is much older than any textbook acknowledges. But proposing such ideas hasn't been easy. Researchers like West and Schalk have been marginalized, ridiculed, or outright ignored by the more conservative sectors of Egyptian archaeology, led for decades by figures like Dr. Zahi Hawass. Known for his staunch defense of the traditional narrative, Hawass has been accused on multiple occasions of stifling independent research, denying permits to those proposing alternative hypotheses, and upholding a view of history that for many is based more on institutional control than on the free examination of evidence. Because if we accept that the Sphinx could be more than 8,000 years old, that the pyramids are aligned with constellations from ancient times, and that there are no traces of soot in the passageways where torches must have been, then we are talking about a civilization with a completely different level of development than we have imagined until now. Could they have had much more sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, geometry, and construction than we assume? Have we underestimated the technical and scientific legacy of these ancient builders? Maybe it's not about crazy theories or fringe ideas. Maybe it's simply about looking without prejudice, asking questions even when the answers aren't comfortable. Because that's what science should do: question, investigate, and when necessary, correct itself. And maybe, just maybe, everything we've been told about ancient Egypt isn't completely false, but it is incomplete. And the most disturbing thing of all is that the clues aren't hidden underground. They're not buried. They're right there, in plain sight. You just have to look and dare to see. Here begins one of the deepest and most provocative mysteries of ancient Egypt: the true origin of the Sphinx. For centuries, we've been taught that the Sphinx, that colossal stone figure with a lion's body and a human face, was sculpted during the time of Pharaoh Khafre, approximately 4,500 years ago. However, an unexpected piece of the puzzle has called this entire narrative into question: the erosion of its body. And not just any erosion, not by wind, not by sand, by water. Yes, water in the desert. Geologists who have closely examined the wear patterns at the base of the Sphinx have noticed something surprising. The marks do not have the sharp, horizontal shapes typical of wind abrasion, but rather deep, rounded curves, as if the rock had been shaped by intense rainfall over years. So the big question arises: when was the last time it rained enough on the Giza Plateau to cause that kind of erosion? The answer is as disturbing as it is revealing. More than 12,000 years ago, right at the end of the last ice age. Back then, the landscape was radically different. Where today we see sand and scorching heat, there were once green savannas, rivers, storms, and cloudy skies. The region was not a desert, but a fertile and humid ecosystem, conducive to life and, perhaps, to the flourishing of a forgotten civilization. Researcher John Anthony West put it best: "I imagine the story of the Sphinx beginning in a distant time, when the Giza Plateau was a living grassland. At its edge, a promontory of natural rock emerged from the ground. And it was then that a group of unknown sculptors, perhaps inheritors of lost knowledge, began to shape that rock. What they carved wasn't a simple statue. It was a symbol, an imposing figure, perhaps with the face of an ancient god, or perhaps a lion, the eternal guardian of the horizon. It's possible that the image we see today isn't the original, but a much more recent reinterpretation made by later pharaohs. Because time, as always, followed its course. Torrential rains marked the end of the Ice Age. The water, in its fury and constancy, sculpted the stone, softened its lines, and left indelible marks that no wind could imitate. And when the rains ceased, the transformation was complete. The savanna gave way to the desert. The sands of the nascent Sahara began to shift, driven by the relentless winds, and covered the great figure almost completely. For millennia, the Sphinx remained buried up to its neck, protected by the dust of oblivion, preserving within its body the secret history of its origin. It was much later, during the 4th dynasty of ancient Egypt, when the kings of that time, while building their monuments near the stars, found this half-buried figure. Fascinated, they didn't destroy it. They restored it. Perhaps they gave it a new face, perhaps one that resembled Khafra's, as an attempt at symbolic appropriation. But they didn't create it from scratch. And this changes everything. Because if the Sphinx existed before the rise of classical Egyptian civilization, then we have clear evidence that something, or someone, was there before. A previous culture, an even more ancient humanity, with skills, symbolism, and knowledge that were lost to time, and of which only fragments of stone and mystery remain. The most astonishing thing is that this theory is not a fantasy. It is supported by geology, by solid science, by observable data. In a landmark debate, a group of independent geologists supported West's conclusions with rigorous arguments. On the other hand, mainstream Egyptologists offered few responses. They didn't refute the evidence. They simply ignored it. One scholar put it bluntly: West is every mainstream scholar's worst nightmare. He comes in from outside the academic community with an elaborate, coherent, well-written theory, packed with data and observations you can't refute. And then, what do the guardians of established wisdom do? They ignore him. They hope he'll go away. But it doesn't disappear, because the questions don't go away. They haunt anyone who dares to look beyond the official history. What if the pyramids and the Sphinx are not the work of a primitive civilization, but of an advanced and forgotten one? What if the past is much vaster, deeper, and more unknown than we ever imagined? Maybe we don't need more evidence. Maybe all we need is the courage to look again. Here, a question arises that, though uncomfortable, can no longer be ignored. Why is there such a fierce resistance to exploring other possibilities about humanity's past? What are those who guard official history really afraid of? Defenders of traditional narrative insist that their caution is driven by a desire to protect Egypt's cultural heritage. But a closer look reveals other, more earthly reasons: academic prestige, national pride, fear of losing intellectual authority, or having to rewrite books, careers, and entire certitudes. Because if there really is nothing unusual beneath the sands of Egypt, why so much silence? Why close doors, suspend research, and prohibit new explorations? Why act as if, beyond certain limits, an abyss yawns beyond which no one should look? Maybe, just maybe, what lies hidden isn't just stone. Maybe it's something that could forever change what we understand as civilization. A forgotten technology, an ancient intelligence, an understanding of matter and the universe that would challenge the foundations of our modern theories. And so the question is no longer just who built the Great Pyramid, but what did those who designed it know? Because when we delve into the interior of this enigmatic structure, what we find is not what we were shown. Beyond the tourist passages and familiar names like the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber, there are other routes, narrower, darker, more inexplicable. In the early 1990s, A German engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink, driven by a combination of scientific curiosity and profound intuition, carried out one of the most fascinating explorations of the century. Using robotic technology, a small camera mounted on a motorized vehicle, he entered the narrow passages leading from the Queen's chamber. Until then, these canals had been considered merely symbolic, paths to the afterlife with no physical purpose. But what Gantenbrink discovered completely contradicted that assumption. There, at the end of one of the tunnels, he came across a limestone slab, placed with millimeter precision. A door. But not just any door. This one had two polished copper handles carefully inlaid. Nothing like this had ever been found before in the entire pyramid. No other chamber, no other passage had ever shown evidence of metal. What could be hiding behind it? The international community held its breath. The gate, informally dubbed Gantenbrink's Gate, captured the attention of archaeologists, researchers, and dreamers from around the world. For a moment, it seemed we were finally approaching the heart of the mystery. But then, everything stopped. Unexpectedly, the Egyptian authorities cancelled the project and withdrew access to Gantenbrink and his team. No clear reason was given. The use of additional cameras was not permitted. The canal was sealed, not only by stone, but by silence. The reaction was baffling. Why prevent a non-invasive examination? Why halt an investigation that didn't threaten or damage any structure? What was behind that door that shouldn't be seen? From that moment on, all kinds of theories emerged. Some suggested that hidden chambers lay behind the slab, perhaps containing technology, historical records, or artifacts that would prove the Great Pyramid was not the work of a primitive civilization, but of a much earlier and much more advanced culture. Others, more skeptical, argued that it was merely a symbolic obstacle. But even they had to acknowledge the unusual use of copper, a rare metal at the time, and even more unusual in a structure that, up to that point, had been built solely of stone. The central point is not just the discovery itself, but the reaction it provoked. Because when a civilization fully trusts its version of history, it doesn't fear scrutiny. True science doesn't fear investigation. Only fragile ideas need absolute protection. And this is where we face a collective decision: to keep repeating what we've been told, or to dare to look with new eyes. The truth is that by following these clues, these closed doors, these forgotten passages, we might not be looking at a simple funerary monument, but rather at a library carved in stone, a machine of cosmic knowledge, or even a testament to a past that our memory has erased, but that the stone still remembers. What if we are standing in the footsteps of a civilization that mastered principles that we are only just beginning to rediscover today? The mystery isn't just what's missing. It's what they no longer want us to ask. For nearly 10 years, the world held its breath. The so-called Gantenbrink Gate, discovered deep within the secret passages of the Great Pyramid, became a modern enigma, a crack in history through which a forgotten truth could slip. And finally, in 2002, a team backed by a prestigious international organization decided to resume exploration. They did so with great care. They drilled a tiny hole into the limestone slab, hoping to find a hidden chamber or perhaps priceless artifacts. But what they found wasn't a chamber, nor a passage, but another stone slab. Another door, sealed with equal precision. Silent, unbreakable. And since then, that second barrier remains unexplored. No cameras, robots, or probes have been authorized to cross it. The international scientific community has repeatedly requested permission to advance, but the doors remain closed, and not just the stone ones. Why this sudden refusal to continue at the most promising moment? Is it legitimate caution, or fear of what might be revealed? The question lingers in the air, heavy with suspicion. Because if what lies hidden there were simply stone or emptiness, there would be no reason for such secrecy. And as if the universe wanted to add another layer to the mystery, in 2017, a discovery occurred that defied even the most daring expectations. A team of international scientists, equipped with a revolutionary technology based on cosmic particles, muon X-rays, scanned the interior of the pyramid without disturbing its walls. This technique, comparable to a tomography applied to a mountain, allows us to observe the invisible. And what they revealed was shocking. A gigantic void, hidden above the Grand Gallery. A chamber of colossal dimensions, comparable in size to the largest known rooms in the pyramid, yet completely invisible from the outside. No entrance, no inscription, no clear clue as to its purpose. The discovery was immediately hailed as one of the most significant discoveries in modern archaeology. A chamber sealed for millennia, and no one knows why. But once again, history repeated itself. Instead of opening the doors to a new era of exploration, Egyptian authorities closed them once again. Requests to study this void were rejected, with vague excuses about security and heritage preservation. A response that for many researchers sounds less like prudence and more like evasion. What are we really afraid of? What are we trying to protect? Because beyond the sealed doors and invisible chambers, there is other evidence within the pyramid that is even more disturbing to the official narrative. That which is carved into the stone itself. One of the most respected researchers in this field, engineer Christopher Dunn, has spent decades studying the physical traces left by ancient builders. And what he's found isn't just astonishing. It's impossible, at least by the standards of traditional history. On the granite walls of the King's Chamber, one of the most sacred and enigmatic areas of the monument, there are round perforations, millimeter cut marks, polishing patterns, and symmetry that defy everything we know about Bronze Age tools. Granite is one of the hardest stones on Earth. Carving it with precision requires robust machinery, diamond-tipped instruments, or advanced vibration technology. Yet we are told that those men, more than 4,000 years ago, worked it with stone hammers and copper chisels, a claim that collapses in the face of the evidence. Dunn closely examined block after block. He documented curved cuts with tolerances similar to those of modern industrial milling machines. He noticed patterns suggesting constant rotation and uniform pressure, as if the stones had been shaped, not pounded. Modern attempts to replicate these results with primitive tools have been unsuccessful. Chisels dull. Hands become sore. The granite, undisturbed, barely scratches. So the question is no longer just how did they do it, but something deeper. Who really did it? And for what purpose? Because if we accept that our ancestors had lost knowledge, tools beyond what history has granted them, then we must also accept that our vision of antiquity is barely a shadow of what it once was. Perhaps what we call civilization did not begin a few millennia ago, but is the echo of an older cycle, an advanced humanity whose knowledge was buried, not only by sand, but by intentional oblivion. And if this is true, the pyramids are not tombs. They are witnesses, monuments of warning, pillars of a knowledge that once existed and that perhaps we are just beginning to rediscover. All these puzzling discoveries, the sealed chambers, the mysterious slabs, the evidence of impossible tools, are not mere archaeological anomalies. They are whispers of a deeper history, signs that what we think we know about the past today may be merely scratching the surface. Perhaps the architects of the pyramids were not simply masters of human endeavor, but heirs to a forgotten legacy. Perhaps they utilized technology we still don't understand, or received knowledge from a civilization long before memory, lost beneath layers of time and sand. And yet, faced with these provocative possibilities, mainstream archaeology remains resistant, often inflexible. Official discourse remains carefully circumscribed, as if opening a door to the unknown could endanger not only ancient structures, but also the structures of established knowledge. Some might say this caution is reasonable, responding to the need to protect an invaluable heritage from speculative claims. But we must ask ourselves, when does prudence turn into obstinacy? And at what point does that obstinacy begin to deny us the answers that lie hidden, right beneath our feet? Because the questions persist, immutable, like the stone itself. What secrets lie behind those limestone slabs, sealed with mathematical precision? What is the purpose of this colossal chamber, invisible to the human eye, discovered at the top of the heart of the pyramid by cosmic particles? Could these unexplored spaces hold the key to answering one of humanity's greatest questions? Who really built the Great Pyramid? And how was such a feat possible? And amidst these questions, one name frequently arises. A figure who, for decades, has stood between the world and the mysteries of Egypt. Dr. Zahi Hawass. Charismatic, passionate, omnipresent. For years, Hawass has been the most visible face of Egyptology. He has held the highest positions in the study of ancient Egypt, from the Supreme Council of Antiquities to the Ministry of Antiquities. His influence is not limited to conferences and television cameras. His signature determines who excavates, what is researched, and, above all, what is revealed to the world. But behind that image of a protector of cultural heritage, many perceive something more rigid. A closed, carefully guarded system that excludes any voice that challenges the official narrative. Hawass's defenders argue that his strictness stems from the need to filter out sensationalist or pseudo-scientific theories. But a much more troubling question percolates in the minds of those observing from the outside. What if the real motive isn't to protect the truth, but to keep it from being rewritten? What if this ironclad control weren't just about defending ancient stones, but about preserving modern egos, academic prestige, or even a nationalist vision of history that brooks no interference or awkward questions? Because when the power to decide which truths are revealed and which are silenced rests with a single person or institution, knowledge ceases to be a quest and becomes a wall. A wall that separates humanity from its own past. By placing such strict filters on research, Hawass has become, for many, the ultimate guardian of the Egyptian narrative. He not only preserves ancient ruins, he also decides which story can be told, and perhaps unwittingly, which one should remain buried. So the real question is no longer just archaeological. It's ethical. It's human. Are we willing to open those doors, not just those of stone, but those of understanding? Or will we allow the guardians of yesterday to continue defining the boundaries of our tomorrow? Let us know your views in the comments when this video ends. Because what's at stake is no longer just the history of one civilization, but the right to know the true origins of our own. Zahi Hawass's legacy is, without a doubt, an enigma between light and shadow. On the one hand, his voice has resonated in the most remote corners of the planet, awakening admiration for the grandeur of Egyptian culture and placing Egypt on the global stage with renewed brilliance. However, this powerful influence has not come without an invisible cost, a mark hidden in the folds of history. The restrictions and controls it imposed, whether conscious or the result of fierce defense, have closed doors that perhaps should have remained open. They have halted explorations that might have revealed secrets buried for millennia, leaving vital fragments of the past trapped beneath dust and mystery. This raises an unavoidable question. Is Dr. Hawass truly defending Egypt's sacred heritage, or is he hiding something more? Perhaps secrets that, if revealed, would shake the very foundations of history as we know it. As long as traditional archaeology remains shrouded in silence and secrecy, the truth will remain an enigma, hidden behind those sealed doors, guarded with almost obsessive zeal. But outside the official corridors, independent voices have begun to whisper other stories, challenging the imposed narrative with evidence that cannot be easily dismissed. Dr. Robert Schoch's discoveries about the Great Sphinx open a window into much more remote times, to a civilization whose memory is lost in the echoes of the centuries, long before the dates accepted by the archaeological canon. On this basis lies the fascinating theory of the Orion correlation, proposed by Robert Bauval, which suggests a celestial connection, a sacred link between the pyramids and the stars of Orion's belt, a trace in the stone that points to ancient knowledge, perhaps forgotten, but still present in the whisper of the cosmos. Robert Bauval observed something extraordinary, an echo of stars reflected back to the earth in a way that defies time. The three main pyramids at Giza not only mimic the shape of Orion's belt, but they do so with a precision that corresponds not to the time of Pharaoh Khufu, but to a distant sky, one that shone in the firmament around 10,500 BC, thousands of years earlier than conventional history accepts. It can't be a mere coincidence. Orion, in the ancient Egyptian worldview, symbolized Osiris, god of the afterlife, death, and eternal rebirth, a sacred representation of the perpetual cycle of life and death. If Bauval's theory is correct, the pyramid builders possessed sophisticated astronomical knowledge, etching in stone a celestial message that traditional historians refuse to acknowledge. But this only scratches the surface of a deeper mystery. Some researchers suggest that Egyptian monuments were not the exclusive work of that civilization, but could be connected to a much older civilization, lost in the mists of time, a culture with technologies and skills far superior to those we recognize. Christopher Dunn, a meticulous engineer, examined the granite blocks in the Great Pyramid and discovered evidence of drilling and cutting of a precision that ancient copper tools could never have achieved. Granite, one of the hardest stones on Earth, would have destroyed any basic tool. How did they achieve such perfection? With rudimentary chisels or with technology inherited from a much more advanced knowledge? The mystery continues when we consider the transportation of these colossal stone blocks. Some of them weigh up to 80 tons and were brought from quarries located more than 500 kilometers from the site of Giza. Official history offers no convincing explanation for such a feat without wheels or advanced machinery. Even today, moving such weights would require specialized equipment and complex planning. Graham Hancock expands on this hypothesis by suggesting that there was an advanced global civilization, now lost due to catastrophe or gradual decline. He cites as evidence sites such as Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a temple complex dating back around 12,000 years, much earlier than conventional history admits. Researchers such as John Anthony West and Robert Schoch support the idea that the Egyptians did not invent these skills overnight, but rather inherited them from an earlier civilization. This would explain why Egyptian culture emerged so suddenly and sophisticatedly rather than developing slowly over time. Although traditional Egyptology often dismisses these theories as unlikely, the evidence is growing and becoming difficult to ignore. Examples, such as the Temple of Osiris at Abydos, built with granite blocks of unparalleled precision, or the granite boxes at Saqqara, which defy even modern machinery, reveal a reality that goes beyond what is accepted. These discoveries challenge the official narrative, suggesting that a deeper, hidden history awaits to be unearthed beneath the desert sands. Could it be that mainstream archaeology has overlooked, or perhaps deliberately ignored, evidence pointing to a much older and more advanced civilization behind Egypt's most iconic monuments? Who were these enigmatic builders? What secrets and technologies did they possess, so far ahead of their time? As we examine the inexplicable absence of inscriptions linking Khufu to the Great Pyramid, the incredible precision of its stone carving, the sealed chambers yet to be explored, and the signs pointing to a much more distant origin, we begin to question the story we've always been taught. These revelations suggest that the builders of the pyramids probably possessed much more advanced knowledge and techniques than official history allows them. Although it may seem unlikely, each new clue makes this possibility gain strength. Perhaps the ancient Egyptians knew more than we think, and those advanced techniques were lost over time. Or perhaps these monuments were erected by an earlier civilization, whose skills were later inherited or adapted by the Egyptians. But if these ideas are so fascinating, why is mainstream archaeology still reluctant to fully explore them? One reason might be that accepting an older, more advanced civilization would mean rewriting history as we know it. Historians, archaeologists, and even entire nations have built identities and prestige on the basis of official chronology. Changing books, exhibits, and deeply held beliefs is not easy. For Egypt, admitting that its iconic pyramids may predate its known civilization, or that they were not exclusively Egyptian work, touches on a deep sense of national pride and belonging. By resisting exploring hidden chambers, ancient technologies, and alternative narratives, conventional archaeology may be unwittingly keeping vital truths buried beneath the sand. Imagine for a moment that we found clear evidence beneath the Egyptian desert of an advanced civilization forgotten by history. That discovery would not only change our view of Egypt, but would transform our understanding of all human history, challenging everything we think we know about our ancestors and their incredible achievements. We are on the brink of unraveling these great mysteries. The only question remains: will archaeologists one day open these sealed doors to reveal what has been hidden? Or will the secrets of the Great Pyramid remain guarded, waiting for future generations brave enough to seek the truth?